Hey, happy Monday afternoon. Dr. Alan Christensen here with you. Welcome to Office Hours Live. So good to be back. We had some time for the holidays, and today's an optional bonus session. It wasn't even scheduled, but I'm back in town and missed you guys, so wanted to come on and just say hi. I'm with you all on Instagram, on Facebook, on YouTube Live, and happy to connect on any of these platforms. So, yeah, I hope the holidays went well. Kieran and I were in northern Minnesota. How many people go there for the wintertime? uh, it was it was really awesome. I'm from up there, and I I miss wintertime. I loved having the snow and some cold weather. And it was funny because when I was there, I had just such a blast with it, with cross country skiing and snowshoeing and snowmobiling and being out on the frozen lake and stuff. And then I got back to Arizona here, and this is great too. So we're thankful to have the best of both worlds and go back and forth. So good to see you guys. Lots of you jumping on already. I'm seeing you all come on here. I've got a couple questions that were sent in advance, and I'll keep an eye out for things that come up on here as well. But couple pieces of housekeeping, events and other things coming up. I'm starting off a brand new webinar series. So this is going to be something that's totally brand new, never done it before. I think it's nine parts. There's a bunch of webinars I'm doing, and these are all really in depth on the use of supplements for reversing thyroid symptoms. So super deep dives. 9 big topics that I'll be covering, and the first one will be a quick overview, and this will cover all the main topics in a little bit of detail. And then each sequential one will be that particular topic in a great deal more depth. Now, this starts tomorrow evening, and that'll be 4:30 Pacific, 7:30 Eastern time. I have to calculate those real quickly. And this is sponsored by Thyroid Specific Formulations. So, brand new company, brand new line of supplements, first ones that are specifically made for those with thyroid disease. And I'll talk about those and discuss the use of supplements in general for managing thyroid disease, improving its symptoms. And I'll get a link up here. I've got a link for this main registration page. It'll be on Facebook. I'll have it there, but you can also come join directly on Zoom. And here's the link for that. I'll get that link up just afterward on Instagram as well. But yeah, I'd love to see you guys. I'll do a Q&A at the end of it, and tomorrow will be a good overview. The main symptoms I'll talk about will be about stubborn weight, fatigue issues, sleep problems, managing thyroid antibodies, reversing hyperthyroidism. Those are the top few. Thyroid nodules. Oh yeah, reversing iron deficit. And there's a couple more, but those are the big ones. So tomorrow's the overview, and the following weeks will be deep dives on each of those. So yeah, that'll be a free thing. You can welcome to register. If you register, you can probably get in on Zoom. I know we can hold 1,000. We've got more than that registered, but not everyone comes. So I think if you come on right away, you've got a good chance of joining me directly on Zoom. Otherwise, it'll also be ported through on Facebook. But the cool thing about being on Zoom is that we can talk real time, especially when it comes, if you've got a question to put into it. All right. So let's see. I had a couple questions that were sent in prior to this that I wanted to address because they were pertinent ones that come up for a lot of people. So I'm showing those here. And this is visible for those on a couple of the platforms. Hey. And I just saw one pop up live on Instagram about sea salt, and that's perfect. You know what? Let me actually just change order because this one just came in real time, and I was planning on covering it anyway. So I'm going to change the order that I had here. Yeah, great question. So the one that came in live was just got on. What about sea salt on label that may be non-iodine? And the one that was sent in advance was, as I read label like rice cakes from Lundberg, I see sea salt. So I contacted them, and after a few days, they got back to me saying it's non-iodine. So let's talk a bit about salt in labeled foods and how that pertains to iodine. And also, we'll talk about iodine and sea salt. Okay. So, uh, salt in labeled foods. Let me do the iodine and sea salt first. So, sea salt, there can be iodine in two different ways. One of which is they may fortify sea salt with iodine. And in those cases, it'll say this salt does contain iodine, an essential nutrient. Now, sea salt can also be non fortified, and most sea salt is non fortified. And in those cases, they'll say this salt does not contain iodine, an essential nutrient. And it's a little bit unclear for the consumer because sea salt has naturally occurring iodine. So, separate from fortified iodine, it's got it in there just by itself. Non-sea salt, land salts that are just pure sodium chloride, if they are not fortified with iodine, they won't really have much of any of it. Pink Himalayan salt's different. That also has a lot of naturally occurring iodine. It actually has the most iodine of all versions of salt that I've seen assayed, oddly enough. Far too much for those to safely use with thyroid disease. So, sea salt, if it says not fortified with iodine or does not contain iodine, that actually doesn't mean that it doesn't contain iodine. So, how bizarre is that? Does not contain iodine doesn't mean it doesn't contain iodine. That means it wasn't fortified with iodine, but that doesn't speak to the naturally occurring iodine present in it. So, when I wrote the Thyroid Reset Diet, a huge amount of the legwork was figuring out exactly how much iodine was in everything. And there were some cases to where there were ranges of uncertainty. And by and large, when that was the case, I considered those foods that sometimes have a lot of iodine, I considered them in the avoid category. Because I wanted to be sure that it wouldn't screw things up if you were going on a low iodine diet. So I went through, boy, dozens and dozens of assays of iodine content in different types of sea salt. And what I learned was that most types of sea salt, the iodine can vary so much from season to season, from batch to batch, that it's just not safe. There's a couple of ones that I saw repeated assays that were consistently low in iodine. And that included Celtic brand sea salt, their light gray sea salt. Not all of their products, so even that company, not all of their products were consistently low in iodine, but their light gray products were. And there was two versions of that. There's the light gray fine ground and the light gray coarse ground sea salt. And those were both consistently low in iodine. So those are fine. The other one that I found was Maldon's brand finishing salt, Maldon. And this is a salt you would sprinkle on foods after they're finished. They make a regular and a smoked variety, and they're both really, really good. And they were negligible in their iodine content. So other brands of sea salt could have a lot, a little, variable, really hard to say. So better to avoid if not certain. Now, the question comes up, well, what about salt as an ingredient? So far, I've been speaking about salt as a cooking ingredient that you use at home. So your mainstay salts that you're using the bulk of your food with. But what about when salt shows up as an ingredient in something that's already made? And someone is asking about rice cakes. There are healthy foods that are technically processed, but are reasonable foods to include in one's diet. One of the distinctions that's been made has been between processed and ultra processed. So there are things like rice cakes where they have added salt. And I did the math on this, and I realized that the amount of iodine in salt becomes relevant when we're talking about salt as your main thing you're using at home. In those cases, you can easily end up with about a teaspoon per day. Now, if if salt is a lesser ingredient in a pre-made product, if there's a small enough amount of it, it's probably not, it won't be relevant. Even given the higher possible concentrations of iodine in some types of sea salt, you wouldn't end up getting harmful amounts. And that threshold is 500 milligrams of sodium per serving. So if the rice cakes give you fewer than 500 milligrams of sodium per serving, even if they don't specify the type of salt, or even if it's the kind of sea salt that may have iodine, it wouldn't matter. So, yeah, when you're talking about foods that are pre-made that do include salt, now, of course, I'm not encouraging you to consume ultra-processed foods, Doritos, bacon, junk food, things like that. But healthy, minimally processed foods that use salt as an ingredient, they're never going to specify the kind of salt. So, rather than avoid every possible food like that, 500 milligrams is the cutoff amount. So, if that food supplies fewer than 500 milligrams of sodium per serving, you don't have to stress about the iodine content in that. Now, I'm seeing some related comments pop up here real time. So just to address those, Krista asked about non-iodine electrolytes. Now, good question. When you're using electrolytes, if you do, take a look for iodine in the nutrient composition. A lot of electrolyte products have added iodine. I don't know why. It's not an electrolyte, but a lot of them have quite a bit of it. So definitely do avoid those. Another related comment, I use Maldon Sea Salt. Yeah, Tana, that was one that I mentioned a moment ago. Maybe you just got on. Welcome. So, yeah, Maldon's Sea Salt is one of my favorite finishing salts. In my kitchen, I really just use two salts. I use Maldon's finishing salt, and I keep a little bowl of that on the table. That's to sprinkle on food after it's done. So the cool thing about finishing salt is that you get a really, really nice flavor of salt, but you don't need all that much. It's much more concentrated. It adds a little crunch to foods as well. And the overall amount that you use, the volume used is very small. So they're really thin, kind of snowflake shaped things, and it's enough to where you get the surface area on your tongue, but it's not like a massive load of salt. So that's awesome stuff. That's wonderful and great. And then for cooking, I saw someone just write this up. New fan Fran, Diamond Kosher. Yep, you're right. That's the one I use for cooking in the kitchen is Diamond Kosher. And that's great stuff. So really nice in terms of its physical shape, its properties in cooking. So keep a little bowl of that, a salt cellar by the stove when cooking, and then keep a little bowl of the finishing salt on the table. And I keep a bowl of both the smoked finishing salt and just the regular. I like them both. For the really savory dishes, the smoked works really well. I'm seeing a lot of folks jump on. Hey, Joanne, good to see you. Matcha Lava, yeah, thank you so much. Happy New Year to you too. And welcome to others who are here as well. We got a good group with us here already today. So let me just talk about some related points that came in, and then I will grab a few more questions that came in advance. Just adjust my screen here real quick. Here we go. Go back to clearing without the question. There it is. Related one. This just came in from Krista. If iodine is not in the nutrient list of electrolytes, is it okay? It is. Bear in mind the 500 milligram sodium rule. In some cases, electrolyte supplements may exceed that. And in that case, then you'd need to know about what kind of salt they're using. Otherwise, it may be giving you too much. Yeah, just a quick comment to this one. This is kind of related to Bonnie. My endocrinologist told me that the amount of iodine in my multivitamin, 150 micrograms, is not a problem. What is your opinion? So, Bonnie, for someone without thyroid disease and someone not prone to thyroid disease, that's totally true. Most people can tolerate excessive amounts of iodine and not have it be harmful, but they're not the ones prone to get thyroid disease. So, a couple thoughts. We see the lowest rates of thyroid disease in populations that consume about 50 to 200 micrograms of iodine per day. Now, if someone were on a extremely low iodine diet and then consumed 150 micrograms in their multi, they probably wouldn't get too much. But here's a couple thoughts. When I wrote the Thyroid Reset Diet, I encouraged an intake of lower than 100 micrograms during the active reset phase, and between 50 and 200 during every other time. And I broke foods down into red light, yellow light, and green light. And basically, green light foods, you can have at them and you will stay in that lower range. By adding in one or two of the yellow light foods, you'll still stay under that 200 microgram range, but you may be between 100 and 200. And the red light foods, they can just push you over the 200 microgram. So the relevance of this point is that all foods have iodine. No foods have none. Even the green light foods, they have iodine. And there's almost always some in the basal dietary intake. And so it's tough to get less than 50 micrograms. And adding that to 150 micrograms will put you above a level that can be harmful for those prone to thyroid disease. And now, another wrinkle on top of that, Bonnie, I've read several assays in which scientists rounded up multivitamins, some prescription, some non prescription, and then assayed their iodine content. And the question they were trying to answer was, did the amount of iodine actually in the product reflect the amount of iodine on the label of the product? And the short answer was it did not. Uh, the study that I'm referring to, they analyzed, I think it was 120 different products, and not a single one was within 10% of its labeled iodine content. And they almost all had much more. Many had 3 or 4 times more iodine than they said they had on the label. So the problem is that 150 is too much because you're going to be getting at least 50 or more already. And the other problem is it's probably not 150. Even though it says 150, if it were assayed, most products would have twice that or commonly 3 times that much. All right, let me hide that last one that I just did. Okay, I've got some really good follow-up questions. And I'll get these, so we'll stay on a thread, stay consistent with the topic. What are 5 foods rich in iodine? So this is kind of funny because it's a question, but also there's an answer. Is it true that 5 foods rich in iodine are? So, and she listed out seaweed, fish, shellfish, table salts labeled iodized, dairy, eggs, beef liver, chicken. Well, so of those foods, liver and chicken are not high in iodine, and eggs are, but only the yolks, not at all in the whites. And seaweed is extremely high. So yeah, in case you didn't catch the thyroid reset diet, the new findings are that thyroid disease, as far as controllable known factors that drive it, it's excess iodine in the modern world. That's the biggest single reason that thyroid cancer and Hashimoto's is on the increase, because right now about a third of the population is exposed to unsafe levels of iodine in America and in modern populations. And not everyone gets thyroid disease. Not everyone's exposed to too much. Not everyone's susceptible. And that's because people that are not prone to thyroid disease, they can occasionally tolerate higher amounts. The World Health Organization has said that most can safely tolerate up to about 1,100 micrograms on occasion. But those prone to thyroid disease is probably more like 200 micrograms for their safer upper daily limit. And 30 to 40% of people get more than that. It's just that simple. So part of the story is here's why thyroid disease happens. And that would be helpful for preventing, but kind of true but useless for those who have it. But the exciting part is, in light of that finding, many scientists did clinical trials to see if low iodine diets could reverse thyroid disease. And they did for most people. In a representative study, 78.3% of people with Hashimoto's completely reversed it. And I'm sorry, they had severe hypothyroidism from it. They had average TSH scores of over 14. Within 2 months of a low iodine diet, 78.3% had completely normal thyroid function. And that number actually should have been higher because that failed to account for the fact that some didn't follow the instructions. If you look at, and also it all failed to account for the fact that some improved but didn't get perfectly normal yet. So if we redefine that and we say, of those who did follow the instructions and did do the diet, how many either got better completely or got a whole heck of a lot better? And that answered 97%. So almost everyone had radical improvements in their thyroid function by regulating iodine. So that's why I've been just on a soapbox talking about this, because it's a big deal. I've seen for years people with thyroid disease trying so hard to find things to help, looking for doing extreme stuff like autoimmune paleo or gluten-free diets. And if they worked consistently, I'd be pushing that as well. But the studies have showed they just don't work. Or sometimes some people, they can definitely seem to help, but not dramatically and not consistently. So this is a big thing, and it can make a huge difference for people. Let's see. Can Graves' disease also be reversed by regulating iodine? So Nori King. I think I've seen you here before. It's kind of a funny name for an iodine discussion, right? Because Nori's like a big source of that. So the anecdotal data on that, and I want to be really clear to you guys. I want to be clear what level of evidence I'm talking about. So large clinical trials have not been done looking at answering that question. But there have been other studies showing that iodine can be a big driver of Graves' disease. And anecdotally, there's a few other people that have done low iodine diets with large numbers of participants for the purpose of reversing Graves' disease. And clinically, my experience has been that many with Graves do see big improvements from that. Now, I want to make a distinction here. So, Hashimoto's hypothyroidism, many people fully reverse those diseases by nothing more than a low iodine diet. Now, Graves' disease is a little bit different, and here's why. With Graves' disease, your immune system attacks your thyroid in a way that causes your thyroid to make too much hormone. Now, here's the wrinkle. There's a feedback loop. When you've got too much thyroid hormone, that can worsen the immune attack that started it. So those two things spiral on each other. And that's been called the hyperthyroid autoimmune loop. So with Graves' disease, it often does require some therapy to slow the thyroid at first. Once the thyroid has slowed, then a low iodine diet can be very corrective and really improve the odds of reversing it. And Nori King, also one of my in-depth webinars on supplements will be in-depth about hyperthyroidism and Graves. And I'll give that an overview discussion on tomorrow night's episode. So yeah, check that out for a bit more detail. All right, let me grab a few more. Well, I had 1 or 2% in advance that I promised I would cover. So let me pop those up real quick and address those. Let's see. So here was 2 that were really, really good questions. These are visible on Facebook and Instagram. For those on Facebook and YouTube, if you're with me on Instagram, these are questions about tests to get a proper diagnosis and then optimal thyroid levels in the tests. So tests for a proper diagnosis, well, there are a lot of blogs that will list every possible known thyroid test. And the implication is that your doctor's not trying hard unless they test everything in the world. And I want to push back on that. I do believe that that for sure doctors need to be thorough, but more tests don't mean better data. And in fact, if you do a lot of tests indiscriminately, you'll get worse data because you raise the chance of having false positives and false negatives. That often surprises people, but the more tests you do, the greater your risk is of getting meaningless data. So for diagnosing thyroid disease, I think it's as important or more important for the doctor to really look at your symptoms, your risk factors for thyroid disease, and look at your tests, but know what's normal, what's optimal. It's a good doctor can diagnose thyroid disease without having to run 80 tests. You're not a better doctor by doing a larger number of tests. Honestly, for screening for thyroid disease, you can run a TSH and a thyroid antibody panel. T3, T4 can be optional in all honesty. That can tell you, and that can give you a good sense of the likelihood of it if you know how to interpret those well. So what are optimal ranges? Well, they do vary given age, gender, overall health status, pregnancy, whether or not someone's on HRT. All these things change that. And then, of course, whether or not someone's on thyroid medication changes that as well. As a generalization, when adults have TSH scores that get higher than 2, that becomes suspicious in terms of there being something slowing the thyroid. So that's a big benchmark to think about. Now, another discrepancy between optimal ranges and normal ranges comes up for thyroid antibodies. Some labs say they're normal if they're below some threshold, but still positive. No, if they're positive, that's significant. So normal and optimal, the shortcut is thyroid antibodies are abnormal if they're positive in any way, even with a small number. And the TSH, when it's above 2, that's suspicious for something being wrong. Now, I also want to draw a distinction between when someone needs thyroid medication and when they're already on thyroid medication. So I'm not saying if someone has a TSH above 2, they always need thyroid medication. Quite the opposite. Since the thyroid reset diet has been out, I've seen so many people with TSH scores really high, 50 or 100, that never needed to go on medication. They were able to reverse that solely by diet. When someone is on medication, it does pay to really dial them in towards an optimal ideal range. That'll improve their odds of not needing it long term. But those not on medication, I'm much less apt to initiate therapy for someone than I would have been in the past. Okay, so many good comments. I'm going to grab one more that came in before, and then I will grab a few more of these new ones that just came in here today. This was from Ginger. I wanted to ask about biotin in supplements and smoothies and hyperthyroid. My doctor told me not to take it right now, especially when I have to retest liver and thyroid levels every month because it would affect thyroid numbers. So, Ginger, good question. So, biotin, and this is funny, you guys. Some have been led to think that biotin hurts them because it skews their labs. No, it doesn't hurt you at all, but it goofs up the testing that goes on outside of your body. So there's a biotinidase assay that's used in reagents in many lab tests. And because of that, unusually high amounts of biotin can give you completely goofy numbers. And check this out, you guys. This is not just for thyroid tests. I did a post one time and I listed over 120 some odd different lab tests that biotin will goof up. Now, that doesn't mean you can't take biotin. And if you're testing every month, Ginger, you can still take biotin, but you want 3 days of no biotin before you do your blood tests. And that's honestly, it's worth doing for any blood test. I mean, you name it, vitamin D, ferritin, hormones, COVID antibodies, anything you could imagine can be goofed up by having recently taken biotin in addition to thyroid numbers. So yeah, taking it at some point won't hurt you over the course of a month. It's just those last 3 days before you get your test done that you want to really think about. All right, let me clear that out. So here's a good one from my dear friend Joanne. How many milligrams is considered low iodine and how many milligrams is considered high iodine per serving? Well, so we should preface this by putting it into micrograms. So mcg, not milligrams or mg. A milligram is about the mass. I'm looking around. Nope, that's not good. A milligram is about the mass of a grain of salt, and a gram is about the mass of a paperclip. And a microgram is 1,000th of a grain of salt. So going from a microgram up to a gram, like a grain of salt up to a paperclip, going from a microgram up to a milligram is like going from a gram, like a paperclip, up to a full-grown adult milking cow. So a paperclip to a cow is like a microgram to a grain of salt. It's like that big of a leap. So yeah, micrograms are tiny, and they're relevant for iodine levels and thyroid hormone levels. And low iodine diets are generally considered less than 100 micrograms. And then how many per serving is considered high iodine? So per serving, well, when I wrote up the green light, yellow light, red light foods, I put green light for foods that were almost always 10 micrograms per serving or less. And then 10 to 50 micrograms per serving I called yellow light foods, and more than 50 I called the red light foods. I've never seen anything else define high or low per serving, so it's not a formal system, but that's how I categorize that in the per serving. But yeah, low iodine in terms of the overall day's diet is less than 100. And then with thyroid disease, high is greater than 200 micrograms. So good one. All right, another related one. My salt says iodized salt. Should I throw it away and buy one without it? I have Hashimoto's. I would, yes. Now, Evelyn, I was in northern Minnesota for most of the last month, and a place we just moved into, there was some leftover salt that was there. The prior owners left us some things meant to be helpful, and there were some strange things that were left, but one of which was a big container of iodized salt. Now, that was quite useful for salting our porch, to make it melt faster and make it not as slippery, and help break down the ice faster. So you may have other uses for it, for outdoor purposes. I wouldn't use it in the bath, though. You actually absorb a lot of iodine across the skin. So if you're using it for anything besides your body, inside your body or outside your body, you could use salt in other purposes, but I'd throw it away then. I wouldn't use it inside your system at all, or in the bath even. Tana, I got better, not supplement of iodine, just eat in foods only. Yeah, and just a generalization, we don't need iodine supplements on the modern world. We get plenty or more than enough in our diet, and most are getting too much. I'm going to grab one more here, then I'll grab a couple on Instagram, and then I'm going to wrap up a little quicker today because tomorrow is a real in-depth webinar. If you join me late, I'll be doing a webinar tomorrow. This will be the first in a series of 9, and these will be deep dives into reversing common thyroid symptoms with supplements. So we'll talk about stubborn weight, fatigue, sleep issues. That's going to be a cool topic. Iron deficiency, thyroid nodules, hyperthyroidism, thyroid antibodies, and tomorrow will be an overview, and I'll touch on each of those topics. And in the following weeks, I'll grab each one of those and go in much more detail with that. So I'll make sure there's links available for that. I'll put that back up on the chat on, here we go. Yep, I got one up on the chat on Facebook and YouTube. I'll get it up afterward for Instagram. But yeah, come hang out tomorrow. We'll talk about that in great detail. But I'm going to go easy on my voice today so I'm not too hoarse for that. Okay, good one here. Why would ultrasound work better for Hashimoto's test? My blood work didn't show up on it. So yeah, Tana, this is a great question. And this is something that often surprises people, but many that have Hashimoto's do not have measurable thyroid antibodies. Here's some reasons why. There's a lot of different ways your immune system attacks your thyroid. 2 of those ways are antithyroglobulin and antithyroid peroxidase. Now, those are 2 out of probably about 13. The other 11 or more are things we don't have blood tests for, so we simply cannot test. Now, the other consideration is that antithyroglobulin and antithyroid peroxidase, they're not how Hashimoto's forms, believe it or not. They're often there with Hashimoto's, but they're not what damages the thyroid. Now, this is a subtle distinction, but it's a significant one. Think about like smoke and fire. You can have hot, smoldering coals, but not a lot of smoke, right? So there's usually smoke with fire, but there's not always smoke with hot things that damage stuff. I remember one time I was little, my grandpa Bergstrom, my mom's dad, he had a barbecue for us, and then he got rid of the coals afterward by burying them in some sand or in some dirt by one of the old gardens. I didn't know where he put them. Me and my cousins were running all around the yard barefoot. And of course, I stepped right where I shouldn't. I stepped right in the hot coals. And I guess Tony Robbins wasn't there to help out and make me able to walk on the burning coals. But they did burn my foot pretty badly. But there was no smoke, right? But there was still burning. There was still heat. And that's how thyroid antibodies work. They're kind of like the smoke that's often there, but not always there. And that's why sometimes high thyroid antibodies don't do that much. Some people have high antibodies and never get thyroid disease. You can imagine like a few pine branches that have massive amounts of smoke but no real heat. And then other people can develop the disease but not have the antibodies ever show up. And that's more like those hot coals. So in a lot of those cases, you can see the signs of Hashimoto's via the structural changes to the thyroid on ultrasound. And the other big advantage of having ultrasounds done is that they can really help it show up when someone has damage to the thyroid that could lead to thyroid cancer. And that's one of the big concerns about having structural changes is developing thyroid cancer eventually. So by having the ultrasounds done regularly, you can stay on top of that and really identify that risk and manage it well. So that's a good reason to have those. Let me just take a peek. Okay, so I'm looking for a couple related questions to the things we talked about. What if you get low iodine? So yeah, good question on Instagram from Gitly. You really won't on a low iodine diet in the modern world. And if you've got thyroid disease, you especially won't. So, and I say that because low iodine complications have basically vanished from the world. Back in 91, we had 112 nations that were categorized as severely iodine deficient. By 2014, that number went down to 0. In terms of complications such as cretinism or congenital hypothyroidism, those haven't been observed in the world since a few rare episodes in 1990. So no one actually gets iodine deficient. Now, there are a lot of ways that doctors misunderstand iodine tests and they diagnose iodine deficiencies. I've talked a bit about that. And the short version is that the tests or the ranges, if they're used properly, they wouldn't show up that way. And they wouldn't say people were deficient. Blood levels of iodine can be low when you're not deficient, so can urinary levels. There's a lot of reasons for that. And the skin tests are not accurate. So you won't get iodine deficient. Now, the possible exception, because I guess everything's possible, I have seen people where their diets were comprised of only raw cruciferous vegetables. I once saw a young man who lived off of pounds of raw broccoli per day, and he had no other food in his diet. So not only was he iodine deficient, he had a lot of deficiencies. He had a lot of nutritional problems. So it's possible, but it's extremely improbable. It's not a likely problem. And the guidelines that I talk about in the Thyroid Reset diet, they talk about how to get variety in your diet so you won't be iodine deficient. So yeah, you can cut out the big obvious sources of that and be confident that you won't be getting dangerously low amounts. That's really something that doesn't have to happen on a good healthy diet. So other related questions, what about Epsom salt? Is that bad in a bath if you have Hashimoto's? Great question. It's called salt, and it's salt in a broader sense, but it's actually magnesium sulfate. So there's no naturally occurring iodine, nor is there any fortified iodine in Epsom salt. So enjoy it. I like it too. And don't worry about that one at all. With Hashimoto's, should I do metabolism reset or thyroid reset? Also supplements. Should I be the new thyroid one to continue with the reset supplements? So this is a great question. So the current supplements, the daily reset pack, the reset shake, those are great to continue on. The new ones that I'll announce in more detail tomorrow, those are to work in addition for any underlying, or I should say, any ongoing thyroid specific symptoms. So if you've done these things and if you're debating about metabolism reset or thyroid reset, I could guess that perhaps weight has been a struggle. And if that's true, the current things you're on are fine. There is going to be a blend to help with that called Metabolism Boost, which I'll talk about tomorrow. And in terms of diet, the cool trick is you can easily do the metabolism reset and the thyroid reset simultaneously. And it's like no more work. So the metabolism reset is a 28-day process that helps to restart your liver to burn fat again. And the thyroid reset is really about just going low in iodine. So you can do the metabolism reset and do that with low iodine foods. And the cool trick is almost all the foods on the metabolism reset diet are already low iodine. The only few that are not are, I talked about a lot of seafood options in the metabolism reset. With the thyroid reset, you want to be more selective. There's a lot of types of seafood you would want to avoid, but there are some that are safe, and that's all detailed in the thyroid reset diet. The other categories would be egg yolks and dairy food. The metabolism reset, I didn't use those foods a lot, but they were occasional options. In the thyroid reset, those things are more limited. So as long as you're aware of the foods that fit the thyroid reset diet, you can easily follow the metabolism reset protocols. So yeah, you can do both with no extra work. Thanks, Dr. C. Super helpful on the biotin info. You're welcome, Ginger. Glad that was useful. You're totally fine with your biotin. Just skip it for 3 days before your tests. And Ginger, if you're checking your thyroid every month, like you said, you might have seen this in my work, maybe you haven't, but there's 5 really important rules to get consistent, comparable thyroid blood tests. If you don't follow the 5, your test can be hard to compare from one to another because they get goofed up. So biotin was one. Second one would be do your tests before you take your thyroid medication for the day. I'm assuming you're on thyroid meds, so get your blood test done before you take your medicine that day. Third one is get your blood test done in the morning, not in the afternoon. Get them done while you're fasting before you've had any food. And this is a big one. If you are a menstruating woman, get your thyroid blood test done away from the middle of your cycle. So you want them the first week or the last week of your cycle. To be really precise, day 1 through 9 is fine, and day 20 through 28 is great. But between those two, days 10 through 20, not good, not accurate. What happens is thyroid binding globulin, which women make a lot of mid cycle, can give you goofy readings, readings that are not consistent from one to the next. So, especially when you're testing each month, if you were to test 1 month and you were at like day 2 of your cycle when you had your flow going on, and the next month you tested on day 15, you're going to get different numbers only because you tested at different parts of your cycle. And a doctor may not know that. They may think, oh, wow, now this is working differently. The medicine has changed, or your body's not absorbing it. No, it's just not the same comparison. It's apples to oranges. So you want to compare apples to apples. And those 5 rules are critical, especially when you're testing often. If you don't take those into account, your repeat readings will go up and down for reasons that won't make any sense whatsoever. Related question, Lee, daily reset supplements contain biotin. Do I avoid taking those 3 days prior to testing? Yep, for sure. Yep, everything with biotin, 3 days. And I encourage probiotics are the other category, and they can change the reading of your thyroid antibodies. So yeah, probiotics and then biotin are 2 things to really avoid for 3 days prior. Joanne, you're so welcome. Glad it was helpful. And I see a bunch more really good stuff. I might hold on to some of these for next week, but again, I'm going to save my voice. So come on back tomorrow, you guys. Tomorrow will be a little bit later. And there's a link that I'll give you all. I'll pop this up on Instagram. I've got it up on the current platforms right now. And you can join me on Zoom. We'll do a one-on-one Q&As afterwards. And I'll do a good detailed discussion on the new supplements, how to use them to reverse the symptoms safely. And I look forward to seeing you guys. All right. Take great care. One more thing I should say. We've got about 1,300 signed up for the webinar tomorrow, and not everyone will come. Typically about 2/3 or 3/4 people will show up, but we've got space for 1,000. So it's probably going to be tight. So please do come, sign on a few minutes early. You'll get a space that way. That'll be our secret. And if you can't get a space, you still can join on Facebook Live, but you just wouldn't be able to get in directly on Zoom. So if you follow the Zoom link and it says that it's filled up, just go on Facebook on drchristiansen.com and Dr. Alan Christensen on Facebook, and you can still get on the Facebook Live. So, all right. See you guys soon. Take great care. Bye-bye. And I've got to disconnect, and my tripod was missing, so the phone is taped on. So this is a bit of a process. There we go.